A severed human head may remain conscious for up to 30 seconds after decapitation, a grotesque final half-minute where awareness lingers, where the eyes may blink and the lips may attempt to form words as the brain slowly runs out of oxygen. It is a disturbing biological reality that most people prefer not to think about. For Anne Boleyn, Queen of England and second wife of Henry VIII, this was not a hypothetical. It was the final terror waiting for her at the end of a carefully orchestrated campaign of destruction. History often reduces Anne Boleyn's death to a single sanitized line, executed for treason in 1536. That sentence is neat, contained, and deceptively calm. What it conceals is one of the most psychologically brutal executions in European history. Anne's death was not simply about removing a queen. It was about humiliating her, dismantling her identity, and rewriting reality so completely that her erasure would appear justified. Her execution was not an ending. It was the final act in a long performance of power. Anne spent 17 days imprisoned in the Tower of London, the same fortress where she had once prepared for her coronation only 3 years earlier. During those days, she lived in a state of suspended terror. Her execution date was announced, then postponed, then announced again. Each delay reset the countdown in her mind. This was not mercy or indecision. Tudor authorities understood that uncertainty was its own form of torture. Not knowing when death will come breaks the mind faster than certainty ever could. Henry VIII ordered that Anne be executed by a French swordsman rather than the traditional English axe. Centuries later, this detail is still described as an act of compassion, as though Henry were offering her a gentler death. In reality, it emphasized the theatrical nature of the execution. Nothing about Anne's downfall was spontaneous. It was staged, choreographed, and designed to send a message. She was accused of adultery, incest with her own brother, and plotting the king's murder. These charges were so absurd that even contemporaries quietly doubted them. But truth was irrelevant. The verdict had already been decided. In the days before her execution, Anne was isolated, interrogated, and denied rest. Modern psychology would recognize the methods used against her immediately: sleep deprivation, disorientation, isolation, and repeated exposure to false accusations. By the time she reached the scaffold, Anne had already endured a systematic mental breakdown engineered by the state. Her calm demeanor in the final hours was not peace. It was dissociation, the mind's final defense when reality becomes unbearable. On the morning of May 19th, Anne had barely slept. She prayed for hours and repeatedly requested the sacrament. Witnesses described her laughing and joking with her ladies, behavior that shocked observers and has often been misinterpreted as bravery. In truth, it was a fractured response to overwhelming trauma. When the guards came for her, she walked the same corridors where courtiers had once bowed before her. Now they watched in silence, careful not to be seen sympathizing with a condemned woman. The scaffold erected on Tower Green stood only 3 feet high. This was deliberate. Anne was denied elevation, denied the symbolic dignity afforded too many executed nobles. Executions in Tudor England were not solemn affairs. They were public spectacles meant to educate the crowd through fear. Though modern depictions often show respectful silence, historical records suggest a carnival-like atmosphere encouraged by the authorities. This was not justice. It was theater. Anne's final speech was measured and careful. She acknowledged the law without admitting guilt, a subtle act of resistance disguised as submission. Even at the edge of death, she understood that her words would echo beyond the scaffold and affect her daughter's future. Silence or defiance could doom Elizabeth entirely. Compliance, even false compliance, was her only remaining weapon. Anne knelt upright rather than placing her head on a block. Following French custom, she allowed herself to be blindfolded, not to spare her fear, but to ensure she would not flinch. Witnesses reported her lips moving continuously in prayer, her body perfectly still as she waited for a sound she could not predict. The psychological cruelty of this moment is rarely acknowledged. Knowing death is seconds away, but not knowing exactly when, is a form of torment that leaves no visible scars. The sword fell in a single clean stroke. But death did not arrive instantly. Multiple witnesses recorded that Anne's eyes and lips continued to move for several seconds after decapitation, a horrifying physiological response caused by remaining oxygen in the brain. Some believed her mouth continued the prayer that had been interrupted. Several spectators fainted. Others turned away in horror. The clean execution Henry had paid for did nothing to soften the reality of what they had just witnessed. No coffin had been prepared for Anne's remains. Her ladies were forced to place her severed head and body into an arrow chest, scrambling to contain the aftermath of a queen's death. She was buried hastily in an unmarked grave within the Tower Chapel, without proper ceremony. Even in deaths, she was treated not as a human being, but as a political inconvenience that had finally been resolved. Henry VIII moved quickly to erase her existence. Her portraits were destroyed, her symbols were removed from palaces. Courtiers learned that speaking her name could end careers or worse. Anne's daughter Elizabeth, not yet 3 years old, was declared illegitimate and stripped of status, clothing, and household. The punishment extended beyond Anne's death. It reached into the life of a child who had committed no crime. The day after Anne's execution, Henry became engaged. Within 2 weeks, he remarried. Life at court resumed as if nothing had happened. This speed reveals the truth behind Anne's fate. She was not executed for treason. She was removed because she had failed to produce a male heir. Her death was not personal. It was administrative. Anne Boleyn was not simply executed. She was systematically unmade. Her reputation was destroyed, her achievements erased, and her memory targeted. The true horror of her execution lies not in the falling sword, but in how completely power reshaped reality itself. 5 centuries later, her story remains a warning, not just about cruelty, but about how easily history can be rewritten when absolute power controls the narrative.